Avenged. The debt is paid in full. But as he prepared to leave Fortress Prime, James discovered that his war was not yet over. Waiting for him in the main corridor was a figure he had not expected to see. His wife Sarah, flanked by Imperial guards who had brought her from Kepler 438b. "Hello, James," she said quietly, her voice carrying 3 years of pain and loss. "It's time to come home." The final confrontation would not be with alien soldiers or Imperial technology. It would be with the woman he had loved, the mother of the child he had avenged, and the choice between continuing his war or finding a way to be human again. Sarah Chen looked older than her 34 years. 3 years of slavery and grief had carved lines around her eyes that James didn't remember. She wore the simple gray uniform of a mining station worker, but she stood with the dignity of someone who had endured unimaginable loss and found the strength to continue living. Behind her, the Imperial guards kept their weapons lowered but ready. They were terrified of the man who had just slaughtered their way through the galaxy's most secure fortress, but they had brought Sarah here as a final gambit to end the terror that James Chen had brought to their empire. "They told me what you've been doing," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the carnage surrounding them. "They showed me the reports, the casualty lists, the fear you've created across their entire civilization." James stood motionless, his rifle still in his hands but no longer aimed at any target. For months he had been a force of nature, death incarnate, moving through the galaxy with single-minded purpose. Now, faced with his wife, he felt something he had almost forgotten: uncertainty. "They killed our son," he said simply. "I know. I was there." Sarah's voice carried a pain that matched his own. "I watched them put that rope around his neck. I heard his last words. I've lived with that image every day for the past 4 months." The guards tensed as James shifted his grip on his weapon, but he made no threatening moves. He was looking at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, trying to reconcile the woman he remembered with the survivor who stood before him. "Then you understand why I had to do this," James said. "They took everything from us. They murdered our child to make a point. Someone had to make them pay." "Someone did," Sarah replied. "You killed 47 aliens across 17 star systems. You brought the most powerful military force in the galaxy to its knees. You made them so afraid of one man that they're willing to negotiate with human resistance movements rather than risk creating another James Chen." She took a step closer, ignoring the nervous gestures of the guards. "The question is, what happens now? You've had your revenge. Marcus has been avenged, but you're still my husband, and I need to know if there's anything left of the man I married." James felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. For months he had existed solely as an instrument of vengeance, a weapon aimed at those who had wronged his family. He had never considered what would happen after the last name was crossed off his list. "They brought you here to stop me," he said, finally understanding the aliens' final strategy. "They brought me here because they're terrified," Sarah corrected. "Supreme Commander Zeltar offered me a deal. Convince you to end your war, and they'll grant freedom to every human in the galaxy. Refuse and they'll execute every human on every world they control." The ultimatum hung in the air between them like a weapon. James understood the choice he was being given: continue his campaign of vengeance, and watch his entire species pay the price, or find a way to channel his rage into something constructive. "You're asking me to forgive them," James said. "I'm asking you to choose," Sarah replied. "You can be the man who destroyed the Empire's faith in its own power, or you can be the man who saved humanity from extinction. You can't be both." James looked around the detention level at the bodies of the aliens he had killed. Each death had brought him satisfaction, a sense that justice was being served. But standing here with his wife, he realized that the satisfaction was hollow. Marcus was still dead. The pain of loss was still there, as sharp as ever. "What about Marcus?" he asked. "What about justice for our son?" "Justice was served," Sarah said firmly. "Everyone who participated in his execution is dead, but Marcus wouldn't want his death to be the reason for genocide. You know that." James did know that. Marcus had been a gentle child, quick to forgive and slow to anger. Even at 12, he had understood the difference between justice and revenge, between protecting others and destroying enemies. The resistance leaders want to meet with you, Sarah continued. They say you've given them something they never had before. Hope. The aliens are so afraid of creating another James Chen that they're willing to negotiate terms they would never have considered 3 years ago. And if I refuse? If I decide that 47 deaths aren't enough payment for what they did? Sarah's expression hardened. Then you'll have to kill me too, because I won't let you destroy our entire species for the sake of your personal war. The guards tensed again, hands moving toward their weapons. They had seen what James Chen could do when motivated by loss and anger. None of them wanted to discover what he might become if forced to choose between his mission and his wife. But James was no longer the man who had begun this campaign 4 months ago. The methodical hunt across the galaxy had burned away much of his rage, leaving behind something harder to define. He was still a soldier, still a father, still a man who understood the cost of violence. But he was also someone who had learned that vengeance, no matter how perfectly executed, could not bring back the dead. The Empire will fall, he said finally. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but their time is ending. They ruled through fear and overwhelming force, but they've shown the galaxy that they can be beaten. Other species will remember that when they decide whether to submit or resist. Then help us build something better, Sarah urged. Use what you've learned, what you've accomplished, to create a future where no other children die for the crime of hoping for freedom. James Chen, the deadliest sniper in the galaxy, slowly lowered his rifle. The weight of the weapon seemed enormous as he set it on the deck, the sound echoing through the silence of the detention level. What are their terms? He asked. The negotiations took place aboard the Imperial flagship Imperium's Wrath, with James and Sarah representing humanity while Supreme Commander Zeltar spoke for the Empire. The talks were brief and to the point. Both sides understood that the current situation was unsustainable. The Empire agreed to grant independence to all human-controlled worlds and establish humanity as a sovereign species within the galactic community. In return, James would end his campaign and work with human leaders to prevent other individuals from following his example. The treaty was signed in the same chamber where Marcus Chen's execution had been planned 3 years earlier. As James watched the alien dignitaries put their marks on the agreement, he thought about his son and the future that was being purchased with 47 lives. 6 months later, James Chen stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, the capital of the newly independent Human Federation. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see Earth in the distance, blue and green and beautiful. Humanity was free, their children were safe, and the galaxy had learned to respect the species that had once been dismissed as primitive slaves. Sarah found him there, as she often did when the memories became too heavy to bear alone. She stood beside him in comfortable silence, watching their homeworld turn slowly in space. "Do you regret it?" she asked eventually. James considered the question carefully. 47 aliens were dead by his hand, their deaths purchasing freedom for billions of humans. It was a trade that any military strategist would call favorable, but the cost was measured in more than just lives. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that Marcus will never see the world we've built, but I don't regret saving our people." "He would be proud of you," Sarah said quietly. "Both of what you accomplished and of the fact that you knew when to stop." James nodded, thinking of his son's last words. "Tell my father I was brave." Marcus had faced death with courage, and his father had honored that courage by becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a human who refused to be broken, who turned grief into justice and vengeance into victory. The war was over. The debt was paid. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, children played and laughed and dreamed of futures that were now possible because one father had loved his son enough to make the galaxy remember his name. James Chen, the deadliest American sniper in the galaxy, had come home at last, but the legend of his hunt would echo through the stars for generations. A reminder to any who might threaten humanity that some fathers would burn down the universe itself to protect their children. The galaxy had learned to fear the name James Chen. More importantly, it had learned to respect the species that had produced him. And in the end, that respect would prove to be Marcus Chen's true monument. Not the deaths of his executioners, but the freedom of his people and the security of generations yet unborn. The boy who had died asking his father to be remembered had given humanity its place among the stars. Supreme Commander Zeltar stood in the High Council chamber, his forearms trembling with barely controlled rage. The reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of systematic terror that threatened the very foundation of imperial authority. In the 3 months since James Chen had begun his campaign of vengeance, 17 more aliens from his list had died, each death more devastating to imperial morale than the last. "The human has made us look like fools," Admiral Krextal reported to the assembled dignitaries. "Our forces are afraid to patrol alone. Our officials are requesting transfers to the core worlds. Entire sectors are questioning our ability to protect them." The military situation was even worse than the political one. James Chen had captured enough imperial equipment to outfit a small army, and he was using it with deadly efficiency. His ship now mounted weapon systems torn from destroyed patrol vessels. His personal arsenal included the most advanced gear the Empire could produce. Most terrifying of all, he had learned to think like his enemies while they still couldn't understand how he thought. "What about his wife?" asked Counselor Vexathera, her voice carrying a note of desperation. "The female human from the mining station. She must know something about his plans." Admiral Krextal activated a holographic display showing the detention facility on Kepler 438b. "Sarah Chen remains in protective custody on the mining station where her son was executed. Our psychologists have interviewed her extensively, but she claims to know nothing about her husband's current location or intentions." "Perhaps we've been approaching this incorrectly," suggested Supreme Commander Zeltar. "Instead of trying to stop him, we should give him what he wants." The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. The Supreme Commander was suggesting they surrender to a single human's demands, acknowledging that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could not protect its own officials from one man's quest for vengeance. "What are you proposing?" asked Admiral Krextal carefully. "Gather the remaining 26 beings on his list. Bring them all to one location under maximum security. Force him to come to us for a final confrontation instead of hunting them one by one across the galaxy." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only strategy that offered any hope of ending the terror campaign that was destroying Imperial credibility. More importantly, it would allow them to choose the battlefield for what would certainly be the final battle of this war. The location they selected was Fortress Prime, the Empire's most secure military installation, built into an asteroid in the Rigel system. The fortress was a monument to Imperial engineering, carved from solid rock and protected by energy shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. It housed the Empire's most advanced defensive systems and was garrisoned by their elite troops. The 26 remaining targets were brought to Fortress Prime under heavy escort. Among them was Commander Yelthax, who had overseen Marcus Chen's trial, and Security Chief Nex Valor, who had supervised the execution. They were housed in the fortress's most secure section, protected by multiple layers of shielding and guarded by soldiers who had volunteered for what they knew might be a suicide mission. James received word of the gathering through his network of human resistance contacts. The message was simple. The aliens had brought his remaining targets together in one place, daring him to come and take them. It was obviously a trap, but it was also an opportunity to end his mission in a single, decisive action. He spent 2 weeks studying Fortress Prime through long-range surveillance, analyzing its defenses and identifying possible approaches. The installation was everything the Imperial propaganda claimed: virtually impregnable, heavily defended and protected by technology that made his previous targets look like training exercises. But James had learned something during his months of hunting Imperial forces. The aliens' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They relied too heavily on technology and overwhelming force. They had never developed the improvisation and adaptability that human soldiers learned through necessity. The attack on Fortress Prime began not with weapons or explosives, but with information warfare. James had captured Imperial communication codes during his previous raids, and now he used them to send false orders throughout the fortress's command structure. Maintenance crews received instructions to shut down power grids for routine repairs. Security teams were ordered to investigate false alarms in sections that had already been cleared. Supply shipments were rerouted to the wrong destinations. Within hours, the fortress's normal operational rhythm was completely disrupted. The garrison was running in circles, chasing phantom problems and following contradictory orders while their actual defenses remained unmanned. Admiral Krextal watched the chaos from the command center with growing frustration. How is he doing this? He's not even inside the fortress yet. But James was already inside. He had arrived 3 days earlier, hidden inside a supply shipment that his false orders had directed to an unguarded loading dock. While the aliens searched space for his ship, he was moving through the fortress's service tunnels, planting equipment and preparing for the final confrontation. The first explosion came at 600 hours, destroying the fortress's main communication array. The second took out the primary shield generator. The third eliminated the backup power systems that kept the detention level secure. But James wasn't trying to destroy the fortress or create chaos for its own sake. Every action was calculated to drive the defenders toward a specific response. He was herding them like sheep, forcing them to make the tactical decisions he wanted them to make. The alien commanders did exactly what he expected. Faced with multiple system failures and apparent sabotage, they pulled back to the detention level to protect their primary objective, keeping the 26 targets alive until reinforcements could arrive. This was exactly what James had been waiting for. With the bulk of the garrison concentrated in one area, he could move freely through the rest of the fortress. More importantly, he could control the environment for the final battle. James appeared in the detention level's main corridor at 1200 hours, walking calmly toward the defensive positions that blocked his path to the targets. He was no longer hiding or using stealth. This was the moment for a direct confrontation, and he wanted the aliens to see him coming. The first barricade was held by 12 soldiers armed with the Empire's best weapons. They opened fire as soon as James appeared, filling the corridor with deadly plasma bolts. But James had studied their tactics for months, and he moved like a man who could predict where every shot would be placed. He rolled, ducked, and weaved through the energy barrage, returning fire with mathematical precision. When the shooting stopped, all 12 defenders were dead, and James hadn't suffered a scratch. The second barricade lasted longer, but the result was the same. The aliens were brave and well-trained, but they were fighting an enemy who understood warfare at a level they had never imagined. James moved through their defenses like death itself, unstoppable and inevitable. By the time he reached the final defensive position, word of his approach had spread throughout the fortress. The remaining 26 targets could hear the sound of battle getting closer, the screams of their defenders, the steady approach of the human who had spent months hunting them across the galaxy. Commander Yelthax, who had presided over Marcus Chen's trial, stood behind the last barricade with the surviving soldiers. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see James Chen walking toward them with the steady pace of a man who had all the time in the world. "Surrender," Yelthax called out in English, hoping the human language might reach some part of the man's humanity. "We yield! The war is over!" James stopped walking. For a moment, there was silence in the corridor, except for the distant sound of alarms and the crackle of damaged systems. When he spoke, his voice was calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "My son asked for mercy," James said in perfect Zephyrian. "He was 12 years old and he asked you not to kill him. Do you remember what you told him?" Commander Yelthax remembered. The trial had been brief, the sentence predetermined. When the boy had pleaded for his life, Yelthax had said the words required by imperial law. "The Empire shows no mercy to enemies of the state." "The Empire shows no mercy," James repeated, raising his rifle. "Neither do I." The final battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, all 26 aliens on James Chen's list were dead, along with every soldier who had tried to protect them. James stood alone in the detention level, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies and the wreckage of the Empire's most secure fortress. He activated the fortress's emergency broadcast system and transmitted a final message to the galaxy. "This is James Chen. My son Marcus has been avenged. The debt is paid in full." But as he prepared to leave Fortress Prime, James discovered that his war was not yet over. Waiting for him in the main corridor was a figure he had not expected to see. His wife Sarah, flanked by Imperial guards who had brought her from Kepler 438b. "Hello, James," she said quietly, her voice carrying 3 years of pain and loss. It's time to come home. The final confrontation would not be with alien soldiers or Imperial technology. It would be with the woman he had loved, the mother of the child he had avenged. We're dead. The orbital bombardment had achieved nothing except the destruction of empty buildings. The human was still alive, still hunting, and still broadcasting his message of vengeance to the galaxy. In the command bunker, Guard Sergeant Krelvox sat alone with the last 12 survivors of the Imperial force. The lights had been out for 20 minutes now, and emergency power was failing. Through the speakers, James Chen's voice continued its cold narration of the battle. "Krelvox," James said, and the alien's blood ran cold at hearing his name. "You tied the rope around my son's neck. You looked into the eyes of a 12-year-old child and prepared him for death. Do you remember what he said before you killed him?" The alien remembered. The boy's last words had haunted his dreams for weeks. "Tell my father I was brave." "I want you to know," James continued, "that Marcus was braver than any of your soldiers. He faced death with more courage than these so-called warriors who are hiding in the dark, waiting for me to come for them." The final power failure lasted for 3 minutes. When the emergency lights finally flickered back to life, Guard Sergeant Krelvox was dead, killed by a single shot through the back of the head. The remaining soldiers found a message written on the bunker wall in the alien's purple blood. Marcus Chen was 12 years old. His father keeps his promises. James was already gone, vanished into the mining tunnels and then into the wasteland beyond the complex. By the time Imperial reinforcements reached the planet, they found only corpses and the smoking ruins of what had once been considered an impregnable fortress. The message was clear to every alien in the galaxy. Their best soldiers, their most secure facilities, their most sophisticated weapons meant nothing to the human who hunted them. James Chen was not just killing the beings responsible for his son's death. He was destroying the Empire's faith in its own invincibility. 43 names remained on his list. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see where death would strike next. The trap was set with mathematical precision on the mining world of Barnard's Edge. Admiral Krextall had studied the humans' previous attacks and identified a pattern. James Chen always spent several days surveying his targets before striking. This time, they would be ready for him. 3 Imperial battleships hung in orbit around the planet, their sensors sweeping space for any approaching vessel. The mining facilities had been evacuated except for essential personnel, and those remaining were all volunteer soldiers rather than civilian workers. Guard Sergeant Krelvox, the alien who had tied the rope around Marcus Chen's neck, sat in the heavily fortified command bunker, surrounded by 50 of the Empire's best troops. "He has to come here," Admiral Krextall explained to the assembled commanders, via holographic link. "This target is too important to his mission. We've made it appear that normal operations are continuing, but every worker on that planet is actually a trained soldier in disguise." The plan was sound in theory. James Chen would arrive expecting to find a vulnerable mining operation defended by local security forces. Instead, he would walk into a carefully orchestrated ambush involving 3 full battle groups and some of the Empire's most elite troops. What they didn't realize was that James had been watching their preparations for 2 weeks. He had arrived in the Barnard system long before the Imperial forces, using a debris field in the outer system to hide his ship. Through long-range surveillance, he had observed the evacuation, the arrival of the warships, the deployment of troops disguised as miners. The aliens had set a trap, but they had telegraphed every move to an enemy who understood military deception better than they did. James smiled grimly as he watched the preparations through his scope. The aliens were thinking like generals planning a major operation. But James was thinking like a sniper who had spent 3 years learning to hunt in the darkness between stars. The first indication that something was wrong came when the orbital sensors detected multiple small objects moving toward the planet. The contacts were too small to be ships, too large to be natural debris. Admiral Krextall ordered immediate investigation, but the objects had already entered the planet's atmosphere. "Meteorites," reported the sensor operator aboard the flagship Imperium's Wrath. "Natural iron-nickel composition, probably fragments from the asteroid belt. But these weren't natural meteorites." James had spent 2 weeks preparing his attack, hollowing out asteroids and filling them with equipment salvaged from his previous raids. The rocks fell through Barnard's Edge's thin atmosphere and impacted across the planet's surface. each one containing weapons, ammunition, and communication equipment. Within hours, James had established supply caches at strategic locations around the mining complex. The aliens were watching for a single ship carrying one human. They never considered that their enemy might see the entire planet with equipment before making his move. The attack began at dawn on the planet's 26-hour cycle. James started with the orbital defenses, using a captured Imperial missile launcher to target the sensor arrays on the battleships. The missiles were fired from deep inside the mining complex, their signatures masked by the planet's natural electromagnetic interference. Aboard the Imperium's Wrath, alarms screamed as the sensor arrays went dark one by one. Admiral Krextal realized with growing horror that their enemy was already on the planet, had probably been there for days, and was systematically blinding their orbital support. All ships, begin planetary bombardment of the mining complex, the Admiral ordered. Destroy everything. But James had anticipated this response too. Hidden among his supply caches were signal jammers and electronic warfare equipment captured from Imperial ships. As the bombardment began, false targeting data flooded the ship's fire control systems. Plasma bolts and missile strikes fell harmlessly into empty desert, while the real mining complex remained untouched. In the command bunker, Guard Sergeant Krelvox watched the tactical displays with growing panic. Their orbital support was compromised, their sensors were useless, and somewhere out there was the human who had already killed a judge and 2 other guards. "Sir, we're detecting movement in Mining Section 7, reported a technician. "Thermal signatures suggest at least 12 beings moving through the tunnels." It was a lie. James was alone in the tunnels, but he had learned to use the mining complex's own systems against the defenders. Steam vents and heated maintenance equipment created false thermal signatures. Remote-controlled mining robots moved through the passages, generating the electronic signatures of multiple intruders. The defending soldiers split their forces to cover multiple sectors, exactly as James had planned. While they chased phantom signals through the mining tunnels, he moved through the facility's water recycling system, a route that the aliens had never considered because no rational being would crawl through sewage pipes. James emerged in the base's central power plant, a massive facility that supplied energy to the entire mining complex. Here he had a choice to make. He could simply destroy the power plant and plunge the base into darkness, making his escape easy. But that wouldn't serve his larger purpose. Instead, he began the methodical work of modifying the power systems. Using techniques learned from years of sabotage operations, James rewired the main power grid to create localized failures. He could now control exactly which sections of the base had power and which did not. The defenders would be fighting blind, unable to predict when their equipment would fail. The first power failure hit the eastern barracks, plunging 50 soldiers into darkness just as thermal sensors detected movement in their sector. The troops rushed toward the contact in the darkness, using emergency lighting and handheld scanners to navigate. They found nothing, just another false signature generated by equipment James had hidden days earlier. While they searched the empty barracks, the lights went out in the command bunker. Emergency power kicked in immediately, but the brief darkness was enough. James had used the distraction to position himself in the ventilation system directly above the bunker's main chamber. Through the metal grating, he could see Guard Sergeant Krelvox barking orders at his subordinates. James remembered this alien's face from the surveillance footage of his son's execution. This was the being who had placed the rope around Marcus's neck, who had stepped back to watch a 12-year-old boy die. James lined up his shot through the ventilation grate, his fingers steady on the trigger. But he didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, James activated the communication system he had built into the base's power grid. His voice echoed through every speaker in the complex, speaking in perfect Zephyrian. "Attention, Imperial forces. This is James Chen. You have set a trap for me, but you have made a fundamental error in your planning." The soldiers in the bunker looked up at the ceiling, realizing that their enemy's voice was coming from directly above them. Several raised their weapons toward the ventilation system, but James was already moving to his next position. "You assumed that I would attack this facility to kill one guard," James continued, his voice now coming from speakers throughout the complex. "You assumed that I was desperate, reckless, driven by emotion rather than logic. You were wrong." The lights went out again, this time in the northern sector where 2 squads of soldiers were conducting a search. In the darkness, they heard the distinctive sound of plasma weapons firing, followed by screams. When emergency power restored their vision, they found 3 of their comrades dead, killed by precision shots to the head. "I am not here to kill Krelvox quickly," James explained as his voice continued to echo through the facility. "I am here to demonstrate something important to the 43 aliens who remain on my list. Another power failure, this time in the communications center." The soldiers stationed there found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see in complete darkness. By the time the lights returned, 5 more Imperial troops were dead, and their communication equipment had been destroyed. "Your technology cannot protect you," James said. "Your numbers cannot save you. Your weapons cannot stop me. I am in your most secure facility, surrounded by your best soldiers, and I am killing them one by one while your target cowers in his bunker." Guard Sergeant Krelvox was no longer barking orders. He was staring at the ceiling with the horrified realization that death was speaking to him. Through the very walls of his sanctuary, the human was using their own base against them, turning their fortress into a tomb. The systematic elimination of the defending forces continued for 6 hours. James moved through the complex like a ghost, striking without warning and disappearing before the aliens could respond. He used every technique learned from urban warfare training, every skill developed during 3 years of fighting in space. More importantly, he used the aliens' own assumptions against them. They expected a desperate man seeking quick revenge. Instead, they faced a professional soldier conducting a carefully planned military operation. They prepared for a single dramatic confrontation. Instead, they found themselves being hunted through their own base by an enemy who controlled their power, their communications, and their ability to see in the darkness. By the time Admiral Krextal realized that the situation on the planet was hopeless, 37 of the 50 defending soldiers were dead. The trading post Meridian Station orbited a dying star in the Centauri system, its rotating sections housing over 50,000 beings from dozens of different species. It was considered one of the safest places in the galaxy, protected by both imperial law and the natural neutrality of commerce. Merchants from across known space came here to trade, knowing that violence was strictly forbidden. Guard Sergeant Toxmal had been assigned here as punishment for his failure to prevent a prisoner escape on Kepler 438b. He didn't mind the demotion. Meridian Station was peaceful, profitable, and far from the dangerous frontier worlds where real soldiers fought and died. He spent his days checking cargo manifests and collecting bribes from smugglers, living comfortably off the corruption that flowed through the station like air through its ventilation systems. He had almost forgotten about the human child whose execution he had supervised. It was just another day's work, another example made for the greater good of the Empire. The boy's last words still echoed in his memory sometimes. "Tell my father I was brave." But Toxamal had dismissed them as meaningless defiance. That dismissal was about to cost him everything. James. Chen had arrived at Meridian Station 3 days earlier, disguised as a human cargo hauler. His ship's papers identified him as Marcus Collins, a name he had chosen deliberately. The forged documents were perfect, created using alien technology he had captured and modified. To the station's security scanners, he was just another broken human trying to make a living in the new galactic order. The station's size and complexity made it the perfect hunting ground. There were thousands of corridors, maintenance shafts, and hidden spaces where a man could disappear. The constant flow of beings from different worlds meant that one more human face would never be noticed or remembered. James had been watching Toxamal for 72 hours, learning his routines and habits. The alien worked the day shift in Cargo Bay 7, checking shipments and collecting his unofficial taxes. Every evening at 1900 hours, he went to the same bar in the station's entertainment district. Every night, he walked the same route back to his quarters in Security Level 3. But James wasn't planning a simple assassination. The lesson he wanted to teach required something more elaborate, something that would send a message throughout the galaxy. The attack came during the station's equivalent of rush hour, when the corridors were packed with beings heading home from their shifts. James had positioned himself in a maintenance alcove overlooking the main transit hub, his rifle configured for crowd control rather than long-range precision. Toxamal was walking with a group of other off-duty security personnel when the first shot took him in the leg. The plasma bolt was carefully calibrated, enough to cripple but not kill. The alien went down screaming, purple blood spreading across the deck as panic erupted around him. The second shot hit his left arm as he tried to crawl toward cover. The third destroyed his weapon before he could draw it. James wasn't trying to kill quickly this time. He was making a statement. Station security responded within minutes, but they were dealing with a sniper who had studied their protocols for 3 days. James had planned his escape route through the maintenance tunnels, but he wasn't running yet. He had more work to do. As security teams poured into the transit hub, James transmitted a message on all the station's communication frequencies. His voice, cold and mechanical through the translation software, spoke in perfect Zephyrian. I am James Chen. 3 years ago, you invaded my world and enslaved my people. 1 month ago, you executed my 12-year-old son for the crime of hoping for freedom. Today, I begin collecting payment for that debt. The station's command center erupted in confusion as they tried to trace the transmission, but James had used their own communication systems against them, bouncing the signal through dozens of relay points. The source could have been anywhere on the massive station. The alien bleeding in your transit hub was one of the guards who murdered my child. James continued. His name is Toxmal, and he enjoys taking bribes from criminals while wearing the uniform of your so-called justice system. I could have killed him instantly, but I want you to understand something important. Security Chief Vextara was coordinating the manhunt when the message reached her. She had dealt with terrorist threats before, but there was something different about this one. The human's voice carried no anger, no passion. It was the voice of someone stating facts. I am not a terrorist, James said, as if reading her thoughts. I am not trying to free my people or overthrow your empire. I am simply a father collecting a debt that is owed to me. 46 more aliens were present when my son died. 46 more debts to be collected. The fourth shot hit Toxamal's other leg, keeping him conscious but helpless. Station medical teams were trying to reach him, but sniper fire kept them pinned down. The alien screams echoed through the transit hub, broadcast across the station's communication system. Your empire believes in making examples, James continued. You killed a child to show other humans the price of resistance. Now I will show you the price of murdering children. Every being in this galaxy will know that Toxamal died because he helped execute a 12-year-old boy. They will know that 46 others are still marked for death. Security teams were moving through the station now, sealing off sections and conducting searches. But James had anticipated this response. He had studied the station's layout for weeks before arriving, identifying every maintenance shaft, every service corridor, every hidden route that the builders thought no one would ever use. The fifth shot was different. Instead of targeting Toxamal directly, James fired at a support beam above the wounded alien. The plasma bolt was precisely calculated. It weakened the structure just enough to create stress fractures without causing immediate collapse. But the message was clear. He could have crushed his target at any time. I want your leaders to understand something, James said as his voice continued to echo through the station. I am not hiding from you. I am not running from your security forces. I am simply choosing when and how each debt will be collected. You cannot protect those who were present at my son's execution. You cannot stop me from reaching them. You can only decide whether you want to waste more lives trying. The final shot came 20 minutes later, after the station's security forces had exhausted themselves searching for a sniper who was never where they expected him to be. The plasma bolt struck Toxmal's center mass, ending his suffering and his life. By the time security teams reached the maintenance alcove where the shots had originated, James was gone. He had moved through the service tunnels like a ghost, emerging in a completely different section of the station. Within an hour, he was aboard his ship and leaving Meridian Station behind. But the damage was done. The message had been recorded and transmitted throughout the galaxy. Every news service, every military communication network, every commercial broadcaster was playing the recording of James Chen's declaration of war. On Imperial Command Station, Admiral Krextal stood before a room full of nervous officers. The reports from Meridian Station painted a terrifying picture of coordination and planning. This human wasn't just killing randomly. He was conducting a methodical campaign against specific targets. How many were present at the execution? Asked Admiral Krextal. 47 total, sir, including the judge and the guard who died today. That leaves 45 targets across 17 different star systems. Deploy additional security to all of them immediately. Sir, we would need to reassign nearly half our available forces, and even then, This human has demonstrated the ability to penetrate our most secure facilities. Admiral Krextal studied the tactical displays showing the locations of the remaining targets. They were spread across the galaxy, from core worlds to frontier stations. Protecting all of them would require resources the Empire couldn't spare, especially with human resistance movements growing bolder every day. He's forcing us to choose, the Admiral realized. We can either defend these 45 beings and leave our other operations vulnerable, or we can continue normal operations and watch them die one by one. The implications were staggering. A single human had managed to paralyze Imperial decision-making through the simple expedient of declaring his intentions. James Chen wasn't hiding his plans or striking randomly. He was telling them exactly what he intended to do, and they were powerless to stop him. On the bridge of his modified cargo ship, James checked his navigation charts and selected his next destination. The guard who had tied the rope was stationed on a mining world in the Barnard system. James estimated it would take him 4 days to reach the planet, another week to study the target and plan the attack. He had all the time in the galaxy. His enemies, however, were running out of places to hide. Judge Carthul lived in a fortress carved into the mountainside of Vega Prime's largest continent. The prison world's harsh environment and remote location had always made him feel secure. The judge had sentenced thousands of beings to death over his long career, and he slept peacefully knowing that none of them could ever reach him. That sense of security shattered when his personal guard captain brought him the morning reports. "Sir, we've lost contact with the perimeter patrols," Captain Nexvar reported, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly with nervous energy. All 6 teams failed to check in at dawn. Judge Carthul set down his morning meal, a writhing mass of purple tentacles that had been a delicacy on his homeworld. "Equipment failure?" "Unknown, sir. The last transmission was at 0400 hours. Standard patrol check-in. Nothing unusual." What they didn't know was that James Chen had been on Vega Prime for 3 days, systematically eliminating the outer security ring. Each patrol team had been taken down silently, their bodies hidden in the rocky crevices that scarred the planet's surface. James had studied the fortress for weeks through long-range surveillance, mapping every patrol route, every guard position, every weakness in their defenses. The judge's fortress was impressive by alien standards, but James had been thinking like a human marine. The aliens built for overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. They never considered that someone might use the planet's natural terrain against them. James lay hidden in a cave system 500 meters above the fortress, his rifle trained on the main courtyard. He had been waiting for 6 hours, patient as death itself. Through his scope, he could see the judge's personal quarters, the windows that faced east to catch the morning light of Vega Prime's twin suns. At precisely order 800 hours, Judge Carthul appeared at his window, following the same routine he had maintained for 12 years. The alien stood there for exactly 4 minutes, reviewing reports while enjoying his morning view of the mountains. The shot traveled 500 meters through the thin atmosphere of Vega Prime. The plasma bolt struck the reinforced window and punched through the transparent aluminum like it was paper. Judge Carthul died instantly, his body crumpling to the floor of his chambers. But James wasn't finished. The judge's death was just the beginning of what he had planned for this place. The fortress erupted into chaos as alarms blared and guards rushed to their stations. Captain Nexvara coordinated the response, deploying teams to search for the sniper while others secured the compound. They were trained professionals, following protocols developed over centuries of warfare. They had no idea they were facing someone who had written some of those protocols. James had planned this attack like a military operation, not a simple assassination. Over the next 6 hours, he systematically dismantled the fortress's defenses from the outside. Guard towers fell silent one by one as their occupants were picked off by precision shots. Communication arrays sparked and died under targeted plasma fire. The landing pad where reinforcements might arrive was rendered useless when James destroyed the guidance systems. The aliens inside the fortress could only watch helplessly as their world grew smaller and smaller. Every attempt to send out scout teams resulted in more casualties. Every effort to establish communication with orbital command failed. They were trapped in their own stronghold, cut off from help and facing an enemy they couldn't see. "How many of them are there?" demanded Captain Nixvara as another guard tower went dark. Unknown, sir, replied his communications officer. The attacks are coming from multiple directions, but the timing suggests coordination between at least 6 different positions. They were wrong. There was only one man out there, but James had learned to use the planet's terrain to his advantage. The cave system where he was hidden connected to dozens of other positions. He could fire from one location, move through the tunnels, and emerge hundreds of meters away for his next shot. To the aliens inside the fortress, it seemed like they were surrounded by an entire army. As night fell on Vega Prime, James made his move. He had disabled the fortress's external defenses, eliminated most of the guard force, and cut off all communications. Now it was time for the close-quarters work he had learned in the urban warfare training centers of Earth. The aliens had energy shields and advanced weapons, but they had never faced a human marine trained in building-to-building combat. James moved through the fortress like a ghost, using shadows and silence to avoid detection. When he did encounter guards, they died before they could raise an alarm. Captain Nixvara found the first bodies in the eastern corridor. 3 guards, all killed by precise shots to the head. The weapons they carried were untouched, their equipment intact. Whoever was doing this wasn't interested in robbery or sabotage. This was something far more personal. Seal all access points, the captain ordered. Fall back to the central command chamber and establish a defensive perimeter. But James had already anticipated this move. He had studied the fortress blueprints during his surveillance, identifying the exact tactics the aliens would use when cornered. The central command chamber had excellent defensive positions but poor visibility. Perfect for a sniper who could calculate angles and ricochets with mathematical precision. The final confrontation lasted 15 minutes. James positioned himself in an overlooking gallery, hidden behind decorative stonework that provided perfect concealment. One by one, he eliminated the remaining guards. Captain Nixvara was the last to die, still trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy he never saw. When it was over, James stood in the judge's chambers looking down at the alien who had sentenced his son to death. On the desk, he left a simple message written in both English and Zephyrian. Marcus Chen was 12 years old. The fortress fell silent except for the wind whistling through the mountain passages. James gathered his equipment and prepared to leave, but not before ensuring that news of what happened here would spread throughout the galaxy. He activated the fortress's emergency broadcast system, the one that was supposed to call for help during catastrophic events. Instead of a distress signal, he transmitted a single image across all frequencies, a photograph of his son Marcus, smiling and holding a baseball, taken during happier times when Earth was still free. The image was broadcast to every ship, every station, every world within 50 light years. Along with it came a message in the Zephyrian language. "You killed my son. Now I will kill all of you." Within hours, the image and message had spread across the galactic communication networks. Every alien in the Zephyrian Empire now knew that someone was hunting their officials, and they knew exactly why. The human whose child they had executed was coming for them, and their fortresses and fleets could not protect them. Admiral Krextal stood before the High Council, his forearms trembling with barely controlled fear. The reports from Vega Prime painted a terrifying picture. An entire fortress destroyed, 43 guards and officials dead, all killed by a single human. "The situation has escalated beyond our control," he admitted to the assembled dignitaries. "This human is not just another rebel. He is conducting a professional military campaign against our personnel." "Then stop him," demanded Supreme Commander Zeltar. "Deploy a battle fleet. Hunt him down." "Sir, he strikes without warning and disappears before we can respond. He could be anywhere in the galaxy by now, targeting any of our facilities." The High Council fell silent as the implications sank in. They had executed one human child to maintain order, and now a single man was bringing terror to their entire empire. The irony was not lost on them, but none dared speak it aloud. In the darkness between stars, James Chen moved toward his next target. The guard who had placed the rope around Marcus's neck was stationed on a trading post in the Centauri system. James had all the time in the galaxy to find him. The hunt was just beginning. The Zephyrian patrol ship Claw of Justice drifted through the Proxima asteroid field on routine patrol, its crew of 6 completely unaware they were being hunted. Captain Velthara was reviewing reports from the mining stations when the first shot came. James Chen lay hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid 3 kilometers away. He had been tracking this particular ship for 4 days, learning its patrol pattern, studying its crew through his scope. The ship's captain had been present at Marcus's execution, standing on the platform with the other officials as they murdered a child. The shot was perfect. The plasma bolt traveled through the vacuum of space, invisible until it struck the ship's primary sensor array. The explosion lit up the darkness for a brief moment before fading back to black. The ship immediately went into emergency protocols, but James was already adjusting his aim for the second shot. "All stations report," Captain Valthera shouted as alarms blared throughout the bridge. "What was that impact?" "Sensor array is completely destroyed, Captain," reported the communications officer. "We're effectively blind beyond visual range. How is that possible? There are no enemy ships in this sector." The second shot took out their main engine. The plasma bolt struck with surgical precision, disabling the drive system without breaching the hull. The ship was now dead in space, unable to move or call for help with their communications array also damaged. Inside his hiding spot, James worked the bolt of his modified rifle and lined up his third shot. He could see the aliens moving frantically behind the transparent aluminum viewports of the bridge. They were scared now, finally understanding they were under attack, but they still didn't understand what they were facing. The third shot was different. Instead of targeting ship systems, James aimed for something much more personal. Through his scope, he could see Captain Valthara standing near the main viewport, probably trying to spot their attacker. The captain was wearing full environmental armor, but James had studied Zephyrian equipment for 3 years. He knew exactly where the weak points were. The plasma bolt punched through the viewport and struck the captain's center mass. The Zephyrian's armor held for a moment before the superheated energy found the gap between chest and shoulder plates. Captain Valthara collapsed instantly, purple blood spreading across the deck. The remaining crew members dove for cover, but there was nowhere to hide from a sniper who had unlimited time and perfect concealment. James took his time with each shot, making sure every bolt counted. One by one, the aliens fell. The weapons officer died at his station. The pilot was killed while trying to restart the engines. The communications specialist was shot while attempting to send a distress signal. When it was over, the ship drifted silently through space, its crew dead and its systems disabled. James packed his equipment with the same methodical care he used for everything. This was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more patrol ships disappeared in different sectors. Each time the pattern was the same: long-range precision strikes that disabled the ships before systematically eliminating the crews. The Zephyrian command structure began to take notice. Admiral Krextal stood before a holographic display showing the locations of the lost ships. The red markers formed a rough circle around the outer edge of their territory, far from any known resistance activity. 17 dead, 4 ships lost, he growled to his assembled officers. "The patrol captains are requesting escort vessels for all future missions." "Sir, this could be a new resistance cell," suggested Commander Yexelon. "Perhaps they have acquired military-grade weapons." "No." Admiral Krextal studied the tactical reports. "Look at the kill patterns. Each shot was perfectly placed. This isn't random rebels with stolen equipment. This is someone with professional military training." "A human?" another officer asked. "But their military was defeated 3 years ago." "Most of it was," the Admiral agreed. "But not all humans were on Earth when we conquered it. There were exploration missions, deep space assignments, military personnel scattered across the galaxy. It appears one of them has decided to wage a personal war." What the Admiral didn't realize was how personal this war truly was. James Chen wasn't just fighting for humanity or even for revenge. He was conducting a systematic campaign of terror against every alien who had been involved in his son's death. He had obtained the personnel records from Kepler 438b through a daring raid on a communications station. The files contained the names and assignments of every alien official who had been present at Marcus's execution. There were 47 names on his list, spread across dozens of star systems. Captain Valthera had been number 1. The judge who sentenced Marcus was number 2, currently stationed on a prison world in the Vega system. The guards who had put the rope around his son's neck were numbers 3 through 8. James had all the time in the galaxy. He had no family left to worry about, no home to return to, no life beyond this mission. The aliens had taken everything from him, so he would take everything from them. Starting with the 47 beings who had murdered his child, his next target was the prison world where the judge was stationed. The approach would be different this time. The planet had better defenses than the asteroid fields where he had been hunting patrol ships. But James had already formulated a plan. He had captured enough alien equipment to build a small but sophisticated arsenal. Plasma weapons, energy shields, even a basic cloaking device salvaged from a scout ship. More importantly, he had learned to think like his enemies. He understood their tactics, their weaknesses, their fears. The aliens ruled through overwhelming force and terror. They believed that superior technology and numbers made them invincible. They had never faced a single human who refused to surrender, who turned their own tactics against them. As his ship moved through hyperspace toward the Vega system, James cleaned his rifle one more time. Somewhere on that prison world, the alien who had condemned his son to death was going about his daily routine, unaware that judgment was coming. The aliens had wanted to make an example of Marcus Chen. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but not in the way they intended. They had created something far more dangerous than any resistance movement. They had made a father with nothing left to lose and the skills to make them pay for what they had done. The galaxy was learning to fear the name James Chen, though most aliens didn't yet know what they were truly afraid of. They only knew that something was hunting them in the darkness between the stars, something that struck without warning and showed no mercy. They had no idea this was only the beginning. The Zephyrian council chamber hummed with the low vibrations of alien voices discussing the day's business. Supreme Commander Zeltar stood before the Grand Assembly, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he spoke about the newest addition to their slave colonies. The humans had been conquered 3 years ago, and their planet Earth now served as a mining world for the Galactic Empire. The human specimens continue to provide adequate labor, Zeltar announced, his translated words echoing through the chamber. Their physical strength exceeds expectations, though their spirit remains troublesome. In the viewing galleries above, alien dignitaries from dozens of species watched the proceedings. The conquest of humanity had been surprisingly easy once their leaders surrendered to prevent total annihilation. Most humans had accepted their fate as laborers and servants throughout the galaxy. Most, but not all. On mining station Kepler 438b, a 12-year-old human boy named Marcus Chen worked alongside his mother in the crystalline caverns. His small hands moved quickly, sorting the precious stones that powered the alien ships. The boy had been born after the conquest, knowing only life under alien rule, but his mother had told him stories of the time before. Stories of blue skies and green grass, of freedom and hope. Marcus had been caught 3 days ago passing messages between human workers. The messages spoke of resistance, of secret meetings, of plans to sabotage the mining equipment. The Zephyrian guards discovered the notes hidden in his work clothes during a routine inspection. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted 15 minutes. The Zephyrian judge read the charges in his clicking mechanical voice while Marcus stood in chains that were too large for his small frame. His mother wept in the viewing area, held back by guards when she tried to run to her son. The juvenile human has been found guilty of sedition and conspiracy against the Empire, the judge declared. The penalty is death by hanging, to be carried out immediately as an example to other potential rebels. The execution took place in the main square of the human residential sector. Thousands of workers were forced to watch as the small boy was led to the platform. The rope looked enormous around his thin neck. His last words, spoken clearly despite his fear, were, "Tell my father I was brave." The crowd of humans watched in horror as their children were forced to witness the execution. Some aliens in the crowd seemed uncomfortable, but none protested. The Zephyrian Empire ruled through fear, and examples had to be made. What the aliens didn't know was that Marcus Chen's father was not just another conquered human. Staff Sergeant James Chen had been serving with the 3rd Marine Sniper Battalion when the invasion began. He had been off-world on a deep space reconnaissance mission when Earth fell. For 3 years, he had been fighting a one-man war against alien supply lines, thinking his family was safe in the civilian evacuation zones. James had been tracking a Zephyrian supply convoy through the asteroid belt of the Proxima system when the message reached him. It came through an encrypted human resistance channel, carried by an escaped slave who had witnessed the execution. The message was simple but devastating. Your son Marcus was hanged for resistance activities on Kepler 438b. Your wife Sarah sends her love and says he died brave. The small communication device fell from James's hands, floating in the zero gravity of his hidden observation post. For a long moment he simply stared at the distant stars, his mind struggling to process the words. His son, his 12-year-old boy, was dead, murdered by the same aliens he had been fighting for 3 years. James Chen had been the finest sniper in the United States Marine Corps. During the early days of the invasion, he had held the record for the longest confirmed kill at 2,847 meters, but that was with Earth weapons against Earth distances. In space, with alien technology he had captured and modified, his effective range was now measured in kilometers. He had learned to calculate for zero gravity, for the spin of space stations, for the peculiar physics of combat in the void between worlds. The aliens had made a mistake. They had killed a child to send a message, but they had no idea what message they had actually sent. They had declared war not just on the human resistance, but on a man who had spent his entire adult life perfecting the art of dealing death from impossible distances. James closed his eyes and remembered his son's laugh, the way Marcus would run to greet him when he came home from deployment. He remembered teaching the boy to throw a baseball, to tie knots, to be brave when things got scary. The aliens had taken all of that away. They had stolen his son's future, his wife's happiness, his own reason for staying human in this vast, cold galaxy. When he opened his eyes again, something fundamental had changed. The man who had spent 3 years conducting surgical strikes against alien supply lines was gone. In his place sat something far more dangerous, a father with nothing left to lose and a very particular set of skills. James reached for his rifle, a modified Zephyrian plasma weapon that he had customized for long-range precision work. He began to clean it with the methodical care of a man preparing for a very long war. The aliens wanted to rule through fear. He would teach them what human fear looked like. They wanted to make examples? He would make examples of his own. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had once been the apex predators of their own world. The galaxy was about to discover that some fathers would burn down entire star systems to avenge their children. The galaxy was about to meet James Chen, and he was very, very angry. In the distance, a Zephyrian patrol ship moved across his scope's field of view, unaware that death was watching from the darkness between the stars.